Yeah. Hi everyone, thanks for coming. Today we have Kshitij as our speaker. He's a PhD student at Berkeley. Today he's going to talk about his work towards a theory of maximal extractable value. Let's welcome.
Great. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. So today I'm going to be talking about some work that I did with Theo Diamandis and Tarun Chitra on sort of understanding this phenomenon of MEV that occurs in blockchains and decentralized systems all over the place. So just to set the stage, I'm going to be giving sort of a very brief introduction to this particular class of decentralized exchanges called constant function market makers that we sort of focused on. And then talking about a particular kind of MEV, which is a concept I'll define very shortly, called sandwich attacks, and give some results and some interpretations.
A little bit.
Oh, is it? Is it visible now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about these particular kinds of decentralized exchanges and a kind of attack that happens on them fairly often. So let's get started. So why automated market makers and why decentralized exchanges? So there's this basic fact in sort of finance that it's hard to find prices for assets. So if you want to sell something or buy something, usually it's like pretty difficult to find prices. Normally, the way that you do this is that you ask someone how much they're willing to pay for the asset. You go around and ask people and ask how much you're willing to pay. And this gives rise to something called order books, which are very common. And then what you do is you get a trusted third party called a market maker to keep a list of willingness to buy and willingness to sell. And the price is determined whenever the highest bidder and the person who's willing to buy at a particular price and willing to sell at a particular price match, and the market clears. So automated market makers are sort of this other thing that exists in blockchains that in which you don't have a market maker that decides the price for an asset, but instead you use a simple formula. And the way this works is that third parties, that are called liquidity providers, they pool their assets into reserves, say assets A and B, maybe apples and oranges, or Ethereum and Bitcoin, or whatever. And the price is determined by the relative scarcity of these assets. So that is, if suppose you have fewer apples than oranges, then apple should be made more expensive in orange terms, right? So you should make A more expensive to B relative to B if A has fewer reserves. And this idea was sort of generalized and sort of bootstrapped up into these things called constant function market makers. And I'll go into sort of why they're interesting in just a bit, but just to define what they are. So a CFMM, or constant function market maker, is a contract that holds reserves of two tokens, say A and B, and it holds reserves amounts RA and RB. And there's a function called the trading invariant, or the invariant function, here denoted phi. And a trader or a person who wants to interact with this exchange is allowed to remove or add reserves of A or B, so long as they keep the value of this function constant, hence constant function market maker. So now suppose you want to trade delta units of token B for token A, then you should have that phi after that trade, after adding delta units into reserves of B and removing delta prime units from reserves of A, phi should remain constant. So this is called a valid trade. And the amount that you get out from this exchange is determined implicitly by this formula. And a sort of example of these of one of these exchanges is something called Uniswap, which is a decentralized exchange, in which the formula for this invariant function is very simple. This exchange accepts valid trades if you keep the product of the reserves constant. So RA, the function phi here is just the product of these two reserves. And you can construct this product allows you to construct a price for A in terms of B, which is just the ratios of the reserves. And so why are these things interesting? Well, one, people are using these things. People, have transacted sort of tens of billions of dollars of trading activity in these exchanges. Just on Uniswap, even there's sort of billions of dollars that have been exchanged. And so this brings me to why should we study them, or what is interesting to study about them. And so now let's just do a general setup in which you have one of these constant function market makers, which is defined by a function and reserves R and R prime of assets A and B. And the crucial thing to note in the way that these exchanges work in practice is that the user, before trading, before submitting a trade, doesn't know the price, doesn't know the exact price that they're going to get due to uncertainty in transaction ordering as a result of other users that might be present in the system. And just to make this concrete, so here's sort of a cartoon of what one of these, what the transaction flow looks like. So on the left, you have a bunch of users. So these are users who might want to submit trades. They might want to say trade Ethereum for Bitcoin or whatever they want to do. And so these are non-strategic users. They just want to execute some trades. And their transactions get pooled into this thing called the mempool, which is you can think of it as a waiting area where all the transactions sit. And now these transactions have to get added to a blockchain, right? So you need to verify these transactions and add them to a blockchain. And the job of doing that is assigned to this person or this entity called the validator. So the validator's job is to look at these transactions and add them to the blockchain. But the one responsibility that this validator has in particular is deciding the ordering of these transactions. That is, maybe you might want to execute, trade delta 1 before trade delta 5, for example. And this is further complicated by the presence of this red player here. And so what this red player is an entity called an MEV searcher. And this entity is explicitly strategic. This entity sees the mempool, so they see all the transactions that are waiting, which is it's a public mempool. They see all the transactions, and they construct an additional transaction denoted here by delta S, along with a payment BS. Say, and S here is going to stand for searcher. It's also going to stand for sandwich attacker in the next slides, which is a particular kind of attack. And they're going to construct this delta S, and they're going to submit it to the validator. And how they're going to construct this delta S is going to depend on the trade flow. It's going to depend on all these delta 1 to delta N. And they're going to submit it to the validator along with a payment. They're going to say, hey, you have all these transactions that you're waiting to get executed. If you execute the transactions the way I want them, in the ordering that I want them, I will pay you this extra amount. And then the validator gets to decide if they want to execute whatever ordering they wanted, or whether they want to take this. Yep. So the delta I's here, the delta subscript I's correspond to user trades. So these are user submitted trades. So non-strategic, like you or I, any of us might want to submit trades to Uniswap. So these are our trades. The delta S is going to stand for searcher or sandwicher. And delta S is a function of all of these deltas. It might even be a vector. It might be multiple trades that the sandwicher wants to execute. And BS is a payment that is made from the sandwicher or the searcher to the validator.
So what is the trade? What is the message?
Yes. So in particular, what it's going to include for us, because we're studying these decentralized exchanges, constant function market makers, it's going to include the trade size that you want. It's going to be a number that says this is how much input I'm willing to give, and to get an implicitly defined amount of output from the exchange. And so today, I want to just focus only on this delta S. So I just want to focus on this delta S. I'm not going to.
There's a question in the chat.
Yes.
Is there only a MEV searcher?
Oh, so yeah, so the MEV searcher, so it's not that we get to pick the MEV searchers, it's that these MEV searchers are out there. They are sort of, you can imagine them as sort of adversaries or malicious agents that are out there that see transactions in the mempool, which is public, and they construct bundles. They construct these delta S's to submit them to a validator. So there could be okay.
So these MEV searchers could themselves be validated too, right?
They could. Yes. And then finally, the job of the validator is to take all of these transactions, so delta 1 to delta n, along with the thing that the searcher submitted, and decide an ordering and submit it to the block. Submit it as a block to the blockchain. And so, yeah, so concretely, as a result of this uncertainty in the transaction ordering, the user is going to submit a trade, so which is going to be delta, which is a number to the exchange, but they're going to submit one additional parameter. They're going to submit what's called a slippage limit. So this is eta, little eta, which effectively is going to characterize what is the worst case price impact that I'm willing to take as a user. And to define what this is, the price impact, little g, is a function which is nothing but the ratios of the derivatives of phi in delta and delta prime. That is, how much does the price change? How much does this function change? And when you make a marginal change in reserves in A and reserves in B, take the ratio. That's the price. That's the price of A in terms of B. And you can compute the output amount by sort of just doing a simple calculation by integrating this price over the size of the trade that you want. And the reason the slippage limit exists is to define a condition for when the user is willing to accept a trade. The user is only willing to accept a trade if the amount that they get out, so capital G, or alternatively delta prime, the amount that they're willing to get out from the exchange, is at least 1 minus eta times G of delta. That is, if their trade had been executed at the current price, I'm willing to take a discount of eta of say 8% from that as a result of this uncertainty.
So is the user always selling the item?
They may want to do a bidirectional trade. So they might want, so this delta could be negative. They might want to provide, or they might want to pull input. So they might want to do a trade either way.
So either way, the 1 minus eta is greater than 0 is like bad for the.
Yes. Any eta bigger than 0 makes the user accept less than they would otherwise have accepted if there had been no slippage. So what is the MEV searcher going to do concretely? And this is where the delta S is going to come in. So the searcher is going to see that this transaction, delta that the user submitted, isn't tight in the sense that if you were to put in another transaction here, labeled delta san or delta S, you might want to just call it delta S, then the user has some slack in their slippage limit. That is, a G of delta plus delta S minus G of delta S is the amount that the user gets out after the trade of delta size delta S has already happened before. And if this quantity is larger than 1 minus delta eta times G, then there's some slack in the user slippage limit. That is, the sandwich attacker or the searcher can put in a trade right before the user, and the user is still willing to accept that price impact because of the slippage limit that they inputted. So that is, their slippage limit wasn't tight. It wasn't, there was some slack in that slippage. And so, and alternatively, what this means is you can design a delta S to force this inequality to be tight. So the optimal delta S is to force this equality. So that is match the price exactly to what the user is willing to accept. And the user is willing to accept less than they ordinarily would because they don't know where they're going to be in the transaction. And so what is a sandwich attack? A sandwich attack is a triple of transactions where first you compute this delta S given by the previous equation. So delta S is a solution to this equation. And then, so what have you done? You have, say, you have bought before the user, so you have raised the price higher. Then the user's trade comes in, raises it even higher, and then you sell at the higher price. And so this is a triple, which basically is this is what a sandwich attack is defined. So that delta S in the earlier graphic would be these two quantities. So it would be delta S, delta sand, and delta sand prime, along with this ordering, along with the ordering that I want my sandwich attack to be executed in this order: delta S, then the user's trade, and delta S prime.
So, sorry, so can you explain again, what does it mean for the slackness to be tight?
So the user is willing to accept any, they're willing to accept any amount out that is at least 1 minus eta times G of delta, right? They're willing to accept any amount that is at least that. And I'm claiming that if you put a trade of size delta S before the users, the amount that they get out is given by this formula. And then if you design a delta S to make this, the left-hand side of this equation, exactly equal to the right-hand side, the right-hand side was how much they were willing to accept. So they must be willing to accept the left-hand side as well. And this left-hand side can be converted into a profit for the sandwich attack. So if eta was 0, then the user is not willing to accept any slippage. So the sandwich attacker should not be able to put anything in front of the user to extract a profit. But if eta is like non-zero, then they might be able to do this.
So capital G is the integral of the price in capital, right?
Yes, it's the net out. It's the and alternatively, it's the output that the user gets. It's
Can you define that more specifically?
yes. It's so here. So the G is the integral of the price from 0 to delta. Sure, integrating the marginal price like as you get from 0 to delta, but for in each amount, in each contribution is like how much you're getting at that price level, and so you're integrating this over the whole trade, and so the total amount is how much you're getting out of this side, the trade of size delta.
So how much you get means
How much output token you get from a trade of size delta in input.
So if I want to implement the sandwich attack, do I need to, for the sandwich, the delta sandwich, do you also need to get the limit defined as eta for the sandwich?
Yes, the sandwich attacker will need to see, or they'll need to estimate eta along with delta. Yes.
Is there a chance that he estimated wrong and actually the sandwich attack is not being executed or even be taken by the other sandwich attacker?
Yes, and actually there's cases. So there's cases where the sandwich attacker estimates a smaller eta than the user actually submitted, in which case you can get phenomena like the sandwich attacker themselves gets sandwiched by another person who realizes that there's additional slack in this eta, and that can happen.
I thought eta is specified by the user when they send the transaction
Yes.
to the mempool.
Yeah.
So you could actually read what's the user's eta in the mempool, right?
So if this eta, I think if this eta is public, then you could just read it and you could design this exactly. I actually don't know. So the one that I don't know how this is implemented currently, but yeah, if this is public, then you can exactly solve this equation.
Okay. So if eta is public, then you can exactly make it happen. If
Yes.
eta is not, you have to guess.
You have to guess. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And actually, a lot of times, from what I understand, like wallets, like MetaMask and Coinbase, they actually do the job of setting etas for a lot of users for
Okay.
non-certificate. So they might have some formula for doing that that someone is not privy to.
Right.
So yeah.
I see.
There's a question in the chat.
Yes. Is delta S prime? Yes. It's like an arbitrage trade. Yes. You're specifically arbitraging the fact that the user submitted a bad slippage limit and not a tight slippage limit. And you can write the sandwicher's profit in terms of all of these variables. You can write, so the sandwicher, they spent delta S to make the attack happen. They earned delta S prime, and so their difference is the profit the sandwicher.
Wait, so even if the slippage is a discount, sandwich attack can still happen, right? Or
Actually, you can show, and I think we have this in the paper. Actually, I think you can show that for eta is equal to 0, this profit is always zero. I think you can show this.
sure, if eta is 0, sure.
Yeah, yeah. So the slippage limit, if the sandwicher is like, if the user is not willing to tolerate any price impact, then there's not.
But if the user is willing to tolerate even a small.
Yes,
amount,
yes.
Then there is a chance.
This to be positive, yes, yes. And so again, why is this interesting? Well, because sandwich attacks happen. They happen on Ethereum. You can kind of see here, in this like little line here. I think in the last 30 days, like $1.5 million profit were extracted on like some exchanges in Ethereum. So they happen with relative frequency, and so it's interesting to understand what's going on.
How do you identify which transactions are the sandwich?
Yeah, so there's all these like tools that people have built for making like for making this this is called this is a type of MEV, which is like value that's extracted by validators and miners, and people have built tools for identifying like when a sandwich attack has happened. Like you can whenever you see this like triple of trades, you can kind of identify. So there's tools for visualizing when these things have happened.
So it's not a guarantee.
This is like you can think of this as like an estimate of sandwich profits.
But they could see the history in flash loans
Yes,
if they're using flash loans.
yes, yes.
And they could also estimate if the CD slippage is exactly high.
They could, yes. If the slippage was publicly, yeah, they put it.
I think look at this picture. It's very small.
Yeah, I was trying. So it's can you see it here?
You see the number?
Yeah, all I was pointing to was the profits and sort of the number of. I mean, it says there were estimated 20,000 victims of sandwich attacks in the last 30 days on Ethereum. So even though these things might be small, there's still a lot of users that are getting affected.
So you said if the sandwich attack,
Yes.
why even say this?
Because the user, I mean, from the user's perspective, they don't know the order in which they're trying to. So the user wants to get a trade in. You might want to, ensure that at least my trade has some probability of getting it.
For example, if you place a market order on Robinhood, the sleep rate is always 5%, which is very high.
Yeah, and Robinhood themselves take some chunk of that problem. I mean, maybe I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, the reason is because the user has this uncertainty from their perspective. They are not guaranteed to get the price that they, and so they have to add some slack. Otherwise, they might not get their trade in.
What is the x-axis, the y-axis?
Sorry. In this plot, I think it's I think the prof. It's was not. I think there's actually two y-axes. So there's on the left-hand side, there's a y-axis, which is the profit in the range, in like how much profit was there in the ranges of sandwich attacks of like these different sizes. And on the right-hand side, it was like it's how many transactions actually experienced sandwich attacks of those. So as you can see, most sandwich attacks are very, very small in size. Like they're like less than $10. They're very small. Most of them. There's some tail.
You mean the profit?
So the right hand side, this blue curve is how many transactions incurred a sandwich attack like this of these different sizes.
Oh, what do you mean by size? Like the profit made by the sandwich attack?
So the x-axis.
The access is the money you need for sandwich.
Yeah, I think it's the delta S, not the delta S prime minus delta S. I think it's the size of the sandwich attack. That's what I think. Yeah. Yeah. So the point here is most sandwich attacks are small, but there's many of them, and collectively they do extract some meaningful amount of value.
Question, yeah.
Yes. By hiding the deltas, yes. Yes, and then there are solutions that people are working on where they're working on these private dexes where you can do all sorts of things. You can do batching, in which you batch all the trades into one, into one batch and execute them all together. People are trying all sorts of different, kinds of privacy solutions to do this. So, things like one system that's already doing is something called Penumbra, where they have like a privacy solution. There's other batching solutions. Yeah, so there are definitely you can hide you can hide the deltas. Of course, there is a trade-off here though, because especially if you batch, you might incur, if you batch and execute all the trades as one, like a sequence of trades, and you execute them all as one, all the users in that batch are getting the same price. And so there might be some users who might be getting like a really worse price than other users, especially if there's big traders in the sequence. Sorry?
Why does batching help?
Batching helps here because the sandwicher is not able to distinguish user trades. Like you're not able to, if you batch all the trades together and execute them all as one at one price, then there's no individual trade sandwich attack to be had.
But you can't still sandwich the whole batch.
You can still sandwich the whole batch, but yeah, you can. Yeah.
Probably it's a bigger problem because.
Well, I think it would depend. I mean, maybe as a batch, you have like better estimates of slippages and things like that. Or yeah, so yeah. Okay. Yeah, and so now, just to give some just some basic bounds on these functions because ultimately what the goal is to give some conditions on when sandwiching really hurts users and when sandwiching maybe does not hurt users as much in different situations. So that's basically going to be the program. So so little g, if you recall, is the price function. It's the ratios of the partial derivatives of the trading invariant fee in the third and fourth argument. And there's just, you can construct, you can, if you have these bounds that the price given a trade of size delta increases by at most some linear amount and at least some linear amount. So that is, there's some amount of liquidity in the system that changes the price, and the price is stable, that it doesn't just blow up. So if you have these linear upper and lower bounds, then you can call the ratios of these things the price curvature. And I'll sort of say why this is useful in a second. And the other thing is many large CFMMs that are used in practice actually have these properties. There's Uniswap, for example, has, you can compute what these constants beta and alpha are for Uniswap. Of course, these are all bounds that are sort of local in the sense that they're defined over an interval. So they're defined over if you do a trade of size delta that lies between 0 and L here. And similarly, you might want some bounds on the output, the net output that you're getting, capital G, which if you recall is the integral of little g. And if this function also has some linear upper and lower bounds. So the basic result is that the sandwicher's profit depends on these constants, and they're pretty much overdetermined by sort of 1 degree of freedom. That is, you don't really need alpha, beta, kappa, n, and u to describe the sandwich profits. But the point here is that the sandwicher's profit, if you define it in this way, in the space, in the quantity spaces we've defined it, because remember we define the slippage limit as the minimum quantity that the user is willing to get out. Then the sandwich profit sort of depends on not just the price sensitivity, but it also has sort of this change in sort of how much the output you get out, the maximum and the minimum change in the output that you get out after a trade of size delta. And yeah, so you could just construct some very simple bounds on this P&L function just by using these upper and lower bounds for linear upper and lower bounds for little g and capital G. And kind of what you get is a result that is sort of intuitive, which says that the sandwicher's profit is there's a linear upper bound for the sandwicher's profit in eta, the slippage. So as the slippage limit gets worse, the user submits worse slippage limits, you can sort of linearly improve the sandwich profit by doing this optimal sandwich.
I'm just sorry, what is P&L? I don't understand how this is.
P&L is the difference, is this function. Is this function, the sandwicher's profit function. which is the difference of the post-trade and the pre-trade, the delta S prime and delta S. Delta S is the amount that the sandwicher put in before the user. Delta S prime is the amount that they got out, and their difference is the profit and loss, is the profit of the sandwich. And it's a function of the user trade and the solution.
So there is only one transaction, is this the profitable, one transaction?
Yes, for one transaction of size delta with a slippage limit 8. And yeah, and as I said, this is as eta gets as eta sort of increases, this profit linearly increases. That's
Why doesn't this PNL depends on the phi, the original function?
so all of these constants are in fact bounds on that function and the derivatives of that function. So in particular, like G, which is the ratio of the partial derivatives of phi, has the upper and lower bounds given by alpha and beta.
Could you please go back to the definition of those for two bonds, and alpha and beta depend implicitly on R and R prime, right?
Yes, and so this is they depend on R and R prime because this bound is only valid on an interval.
So the bond you have in the later slide
Also,
at specific moment.
also depends on you're trading at a specific reserve level at a specific trade size that falls within the interval. Yes.
So for the second row, how should we interpret this result? Is this something good or bad? Like, should I interpret this as good?
I would interpret it just as intuitively correct, as in it makes sense in the sense that if the users, I wouldn't interpret it as, well, it's bad in the sense that if the users slippage is like really bad, then they're going to get sandwich. You know, the maximum sandwich profit that you can extract is sort of linearly worse than if their slippage was set correctly. So I wouldn't say it's good or bad. I think it's just at least it makes sense that you would have a linear bound.
I guess it's not that sort of positive.
Yes.
You have all those linear bound on
Yes.
G, so finally you will have a linear dependence on.
Yes. Great. Yeah, I think but it's just a sanity check that the user, in fact, making their slippage worse makes the sandwich profit also for them worse. So now let's I'll just go into sort of two types of two settings that we looked at with these sandwich attacks. The first is trying to understand how much worse does a user how much worse price execution does a user experience when they're trying to route a trade on a network of these constant function market makers. So this whole time we have just been dealing with one exchange, one constant function market maker, in which that has two reserve values RA and RB, and we're just trading with this one exchange. But now what happens if we start trading with a network of these things? Network is in the sense that you have pairs that trade Ethereum to Bitcoin, Bitcoin to something else, and you have all these, you have a network of these things. So what happens when you try to start trading on a network of these? And the second setting is what happens, because I remember I started this whole thing with that flow diagram where the ordering that the user experiences sort of really affects what the price they're going to get is. And so how much worse is a user's price execution upon reordering by a sandwich attacker? That is, how much worse can you do by shuffling the trades around and correspondingly shuffling the sandwich attacks around?
Sorry, can you clarify rather than MVD? What's the scenario if the user submits multiple transactions and each has a different market making function, or what would it do?
No, so I can just go here. So the setting for routing MEV is just the user submits a single transaction or maybe there's an aggregate transaction that say wants to route. So this is a network in which you're routing from say this source destination so this source asset to this destination asset. Maybe this is Ethereum and this is this is USDC or something. And now you're routing through other CFMM pairs. So each edge here denotes a constant function market maker that trades two assets. And the idea is, yeah, you're trying to route, you're trying to do a single shot routing. You're trying to route one trade through this network. And you want to understand what happens when there are sandwich attackers present on each of these edges. So just taking a step back, there's this sort of old paradox in congestion and sort of routing games, in which you start with you start with this like two path network, and you want to route from this source to this destination, and you are trying to route one unit of flow. So you can think of this conceptually. You can think of this as I'm trying to route one unit of money, say one unit of traffic through this network. And the traffic incurs a cost of these amounts. So on these two edges, you incur variable costs. On the other two edges, you incur constant cost. And then you ask the question. You ask two questions. One, what is the equilibrium routing in this situation? And by equilibrium, I mean when the costs incurred by the traffic that takes both paths equalizes. That is, the costs are equal on both paths. And so that's this first condition. And then you ask, what is the net cost of this equilibrium routing? And the net cost is precisely, you take the amount of flow that takes the top path in equilibrium times the cost that they incur, plus the amount on the second path times the cost that they incur, and you get a number. And so what's the paradox? Paradox is kind of that if you add an edge, so if you add an edge between the top two nodes, the equilibrium shifts. So now all of the flow, so all of the one unit of demand, prefers to take the middle edge. That is this path, this middle path. But the net cost of this equilibrium configuration goes up. So earlier it was, I believe it was 3/2, now it's 2. And so this is weird, right? Like you added something and now your actual cost went up. So what does this all have to do with sandwichers? So sandwichers, what they implicitly do on any exchange is they increase the price that a user experiences on that exchange. They're effectively raising the price of transacting on that exchange. Yeah.
So is that equilibrium? If I have one up, go from X 0x, and then never mind. Okay, it's constant.
It's a zero cost. Yeah, and so what does this all have to do with sandwichers? So sandwichers, they increase the cost of edges. So now let's just like extend this paradox one more step, in which we now start, instead of having the zero cost edge, you now replace it with some variable cost edge where the cost scales like epsilon x. So some small epsilon, and then the amount of flow that's on. And you can think of this conceptually, if you imagine instead of this as a traffic network, if you imagine this as a network of constant function market makers that are trading assets from source to destination, you can imagine this epsilon x as being like a model of a sandwich attacker, because as we showed, the sandwich attacker's profit is like sort of linear in user slippage. So maybe this epsilon is like how much the user is bad at setting their slippage limits, and so there's a sandwicher that's linearly increasing the cost of that edge. And so now something interesting happens.
Let's change the chat.
Oh, please. Who determines the rerouting? The validator. Yeah. So here the routing we're sort of So here the notion of routing here is equilibrium routing, which is I want to understand what is the case where all the costs on all the paths are equalized. So this is not, so here I'm not asking what would the validator prefer to happen. I'm asking what would the users in this case, or the the user that is sending a trade from source to destination, what would the user prefer? And this is going to be different from the reordering that the validator themselves does. This is separate. And so sort of what happens here is so you start with some small epsilon, and as you increase epsilon, that is, you increase, for example, the sandwicher's presence by worsening the slippage limit on this network, you're going to shift the equilibrium back to what it was earlier. And in particular, you're going to reduce the cost of the network. So the cost of the network in this example was 2. And now when you take epsilon to infinity, you make epsilon very large, the equilibrium shifts back such that no one wants to take this middle edge. And then it shifts back to the original split between the top and bottom. But we know that the cost of that was lower than what it was when you added the middle edge. And so here's what I'm claiming. I'm claiming that the presence of a sandwicher, if you think of this epsilon x as a sandwicher, in fact improved the quality of this network. If you think about the quality as sort of a net cost, and this is kind of the idea that we want to formalize. I think there's
So what is epsilon?
Yeah, so epsilon here is going to be you can think of it as a slippage limit here, in fact, because the epsilon here is going to sort of control the severity of the sandwich attack on that edge. And the severity is controlled by, you could also interpret, I mean, we've frozen all the networks, right? We've frozen the liquidity, like the RA and RB, as I think we had a question earlier, that RA and RB are fixed. But you can imagine a different, switching to a different value of RA and RB and asking, what is now the equilibrium? So you can, the parameters in the first sort of parameter to keep in mind is the slippage limit. So you can just think of epsilon as what happens when I toggle the slippage limit and I make it large.
But the slippage limit toggles between 0 and 1, right?
Yes. Yeah. So this phenomenon, yeah. So you're saying that you can't take the slippage limit to infinity. Right. You can still get intermediate versions of this phenomenon where the cost, you see this cost is 3 halves, but you can still lower the cost from 2, which it was earlier, right? You can still get lower costs. You may not reach this value, but you can still lower it to some intermediate value.
Yeah. So when the epsilon is high, so almost no people take the middle path.
Yes.
Then the sandwicher will see that no one takes this path. They have no profit, so they'll move to others.
So this is the interesting thing. It's like the model of the sandwicher is like the sandwicher only lives on this middle edge and doesn't go anywhere else. I think that is like could be an unrealistic model. Of course, like if the sandwicher if the sandwicher is doing some kind of learning and is realizing that their profits on this edge are going down because users are splitting their flow, they might move to some other edge or start sandwiching people somewhere else. So we didn't model that, but here's just a one-shot interaction where there is a sandwicher and the equilibrium shifts such that they don't.
So what is the goal of this? So he wants people to take the middle path.
Well, the sandwicher's goal, yeah, exactly. He wants 2 things. He wants the people to take the middle path and input bad slippage limits, right? Because he doesn't want to just take people to take the middle path and make their slippages perfectly tight. He wants the sandwicher wants them to put bad slippage limits and take the middle path. But here, what we're showing is effectively the reactive effect here is the sandwicher is going to user inputs bad slippage limits, sandwichers start sandwiching, and then the user realizes they're getting sandwiched and they start splitting their flow. And so the sandwichers, you can think of it as they're acting like some sort of, kind of like a highway traffic coordinator, kind of where they're increasing the cost for the user. The user realizes, oh, I'm getting sandwiched on this edge. Let me shift my flow. But that turns out to be good for the network because they shifted their flow.
What's the real world scenario that this example is capturing? Is this a common scenario in practice? Why do you care about this scenario like that?
Yeah. So it's an interesting. I think I don't know if this phenomenon has been observed anywhere in data, but one reason to care about this example is to ask the question do sandwichers in fact always make the network worse for everyone? And that's an interesting question because at least it was like people thought that, maybe always the network, always suffers from the presence of sandwichers. And this is one constructed example that shows if the information patterns are like this, like the users are reactive and the sandwicher doesn't move somewhere else, then you can get this phenomenon that the sandwicher actually, in fact, ends up improving the network quality for the users. And the next sort of thing that I'll show, which is actually the more important thing. So this is like, this would be like a very optimistic scenario if this ever happened. Like this is like saying like presence of a sandwicher, in fact, like made the network better. But we can ask for something less, which is maybe the presence of sandwichers on arbitrary networks only hurts the user or the network a constant amount, or it doesn't hurt them, unbounded or something. And so that's basically where I'm going next. So we want to generalize this like simple like like 4-node kind of example to something a little bit more interesting. So now just consider a general graph where the vertices of the graph are assets and the edges are the constant function market makers that trade those pairs. And so every function, every edge is going to be is going to have its own price function, right? This little g function that we've been working with. And every edge is going to have a sandwich attacker that's present on that edge. Okay. And now there's a user that wants to trade a size delta units along with a slippage limit eta from A to B. There are two nodes in the network. And now we want to ask, like how much does the presence of these sandwich attackers degrade the quality of the network for this user if the user is doing this kind of equilibrium rounding, where they are in fact choosing paths in which all of their costs are equal. And I'll define what that is just in a second. So this is asking like the slightly a weaker question, which is, hey, maybe we don't want sandwich attackers to always improve user the quality of the network. Maybe we just want them to hurt the network, minimally or as little as possible. And yeah, so to define an equilibrium, it's very similar to what was in the other slide on the traffic situation. But now what you do is you take these price functions on every edge, and for all the paths that connect A, the source asset, and B, the destination asset, you compose these price functions. You take the composition of these price functions, which effectively gives you a price from input to output over all the paths. And then you call, and so now you want to split your trade amongst these P different paths. And so you have a vector, which is called the trade split. And you call this vector an equilibrium if the price cumulative, so the marginal price incurred across all these paths is equal. Same thing as in the cost in the traffic network. So, but yeah, this is basically sort of this equilibrium condition is kind of equivalent to classic results in selfish routing, in which the costs have to be equal. But here we're asking that the marginal prices across all the paths are equal. And yeah, and so now I can just go straight to the next. Yeah, so now we're interested in asking like how much does the presence of a sandwich attacker or all these sandwich attackers that are present on the network sort of degrade or worsen the user's price and the user's state, the user's experience in the network in equilibrium. And can it be made better? And so now we define sort of how, we're going to construct a welfare function or sort of a measure of social cost. And we're going to define these edge cost functions, CE. And what these functions are is PE, you can think of it as just a conversion factor. It is the price in dollars of the asset that you're trading on edge E, like the input asset that you're trading on edge E, like the output that you get out. It's just converting to dollars. So PE, you can think of it as the price of some infinitely liquid market that exists in the world. So it's just a conversion factor. And what is the rest? The rest is asking how much additional price impact did the sandwicher on that edge contribute to the user, right? So it's asking, here's the price as a result of the sandwicher. Here's the user's like nominal price. And I'm asking how much is the additional price effect of that sandwicher. Yeah.
So what is the unit of P? It's if I swap
Yeah.
from A to B, that's
It's-
out of A denoted in B.
It's amount, if I swap from A to B, it's the amount of, yeah, exactly. And so P would be dollars per unit A.
That's the tangent line at the current moment. And you convert that line to
dollars.
$2.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, so now, just see how I'm doing that. Yeah, okay. So now we just do sort of a classic thing in solver shrouding, which is we construct a social cost function, which is nothing other than these weighted price costs, which is the amount that the sandwicher is affecting the user's trade, weighted by the trade on that edge, however much the user trade on that edge. So this is like the interpretation is, what is the net price weighted amount lost due to sandwiching? Like how much is the additional price impact weighted by the user trades? And then you can just define a notion of price of anarchy, which is you compute this cost at two values. You compute the cost at its optimum, and then you compute the cost at equilibrium, where the equilibrium is the same definition that we gave earlier, which the prices are the marginal prices are the same on all the paths. And effectively, what you want to show is that this value, this number, is bounded by all the constants that all those linear upper lower bounds and the slippage limit eta. And if you can do that, then you might be able to construct some kind of a constant bound for the price of anarchy in general networks where you have all these these upper and lower bounds satisfied.
What is the rationale behind using equilibrium flow?
So the user, I mean, the rationale is the user doesn't have any incentive to change their allocations to any of the paths because they're going to get, they're going to worsen the price on one of them. So it's just some notion of.
Okay, so it might worsen the price impact on particular edge.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean equilibrium give you optimal outcome.
That's right. That's right.
Even without any media factors.
That's right. Yes. And the user, and actually one reason that you might want to consider this like notion of equilibrium is because you can think of, so right now we're just thinking of it as a user submitting this trade of size delta. You might want to think of it as like a population of users that have aggregated their trades and now want to split them amongst all of these different paths. In which case they might care if one of them like gets a worse price by switching to another path.
Actually, is that a result? If there are a lot of players, a lot of non-arbitrageurs swap, and there is a notion of optimality such that equilibrium split is the optimal route.
Oh, interesting. I see. Well,
Maybe that is the strategy that people end up with conversion to.
Yeah, so you're saying in the setting without sandwichers, like there's
Even without
sandwichers. Yeah. I see what you're saying.
I didn't say, are those with the sandwich or?
Yeah. So
Alpha that is with the sandwich.
So both of these are with sandwiches right now, but I think you're asking without sandwichers, do the equilibrium? Sorry, are you asking if the equilibrium and optimal coincide under certain
manner.
In which case you would have price of anarchy be 1.
I thought you were asking with comparing with the sandwich impact.
Yes.
And without, but both of them are with.
Yeah, no. So these are both. Sorry. So the denominator is with the sandwichers, right? Because the denominator was calculated from this edge cost function, and the numerator was calculated. Yes, so it should be the equilibrium split in the presence of sandwichers, right? It should be equilibrium split when there are sandwichers on the network, because those are the two quantities that makes sense.
What is the social cost under the equilibrium with the sandwich impact?
Yes.
You're comparing with the social cost of optimal split.
Yes.
Is that with still
With the sandwich attacks.
So you're not comparing with without the.
No, not in this. Yeah. So yeah, and so we were running up on time, but so the basic way that you bound this price of anarchy here is using a technique in one of Roughgarden's papers, which is called lambda mu smoothness. So you basically want to show this inequality up here, they call inequality 12, which says that if you have any two allocations, any two trade sizes on any edge, delta E and delta E star, then the costs when you take CE of delta E and delta E star should be upper bounded by some constant mu times the CE under delta E plus lambda times CE under delta E star. And if you can show an inequality like this, Roughgarden's results imply that the price of anarchy is upper bounded by a constant, which is just a constant lambda over 1 minus mu. And you can do this by sort of just moving this mu over to the other side, summing up and then dividing. Like you just get a direct constant upper bound. And the point is here, we get such an inequality using the linear upper and lower bounds for these price functions and this capital G function. So this inequality, this mu here and this lambda here will depend on all of those constants, but you get such a linear, you get such an inequality, and therefore you get a constant upper bound in the price of anarchy measured in this way. And so the point is you don't need to compute sort of any precise equilibrium as we did in the brace example, to get sort of a bound on what's the worst case behavior. So what this is, and this is actually saying, sandwichers can only degrade if you have, sufficient liquidity and sufficient stability of the price function. Sandwichers can only degrade the network by, a constant factor of how much it would be at optimum.
So here, by degrade, you don't need to comparison with the without sandwich. With the sandwich, whether like how much you are.
Yeah, exactly. How much the equilibrium deviates from the optimum. Yes. Yeah. So and so basically the idea is there are many networks with this like bounded price of anarchy, and you can, in fact, if you design, actually I think the interesting question here is like, can you design networks to satisfy particular bounds that you might want? Like, can you design a network with appropriate constants such that they're and design the trading function such that the price of anarchy is a particular amount or something that a system designer might want, and that's an interesting problem. I have another section, but I think it might, I think we're coming up on time, so I can. Okay. Yeah. Great. Yeah.
Do you have any sense that without sandwich, like I guess without sandwich, the same function still holds?
Yeah, so if you replace the numerator by like a cost without sandwiching, then I believe you still get the linear upper and lower bounds. I don't see what is preventing that, but I'm not very sure.
I wonder if linear bound is a good bound. Like if
Yeah.
0.1, then is like usually you have like something that you only can get 0.1 times that.
Yes.
Sounds really bad.
Yes. And I think in particular, you don't have global two-sided linear upper and lower bounds for any of these functions, because this like capital G function that we have, you can show that it's a concave function. And concave functions don't have, generically they don't have global linear lower bounds. So yeah, you might need to like tweak that to make those bounds better. But I think that's like an instance dependent kind of thing that you have to construct those bounds for. You might be able to show better constants. Yeah, the other thing that I just had was on reordering, but we can save that for later. Thanks.